Hi, this is Carol Pope.
Hi, I'm Kevin Staples.
And you're listening to Rainbow Country
with Mark Tara.
The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the persons appearing on the program.
Today on Rainbow Country, an emotionally powerful episode featuring Billy Flanigan, the happiest man on earth. A documentary that chronicles Billy Flanigan's 4 decades as a Disney performer and spotlights his coming out story after over 3 decades of marriage. All that and more on episode 328, so stay tuned for Gay Talk Radio right here on Rainbow Country.
Hello, my name is Conchita.
And I'm Barbecue.
And my name is Hardcora. And we are the Beat Girls.
You're listening to
Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Well, hello and welcome to a brand new journey through Rainbow Country. As I like to call it, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And as always, I am your tour guide through Rainbow Country. I'm producer and host, Mark Tara. By the way, Rainbow Country originates from CIUT-FM in Toronto, and now proudly in syndication on 12 outlets across Canada, from coast to coast to coast. The Yukon, British Columbia, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, the east coast of Canada in Newfoundland, Ontario, even down to Buffalo, New York, and online. Well, thanks to you tuning in, streaming, downloading, but ultimately listening. Together we continue to build Rainbow Country into a nationally syndicated gay radio show, a #1 LGBT podcast on Podomatic.com's Gay and Lesbian chart, as well as being recognized as Canada's #2 LGBT podcast on Feedspot.com. So today, singer, dancer, actor, performer, the longest continually contracted performer in Walt Disney World history, Billy Flanigan, is my guest and joins me to talk about his documentary, Billy Flanigan, the Happiest Man on Earth, a documentary that chronicles his 4 decades as a Disney performer, as well as his coming out story, coming out after over 30 years of marriage. And later on in Hour 1, a flashback to my interview with award-winning trans filmmaker Chase Joint, who talks about the new trans film, Framing Agnes. Plus in Hour 2, music from LGBT artists, independent artists, voices that we've come to know and love in classic disco, classic 80s, classic house. And on this episode, I'm featuring some classic disco, some queer rap, and more. All that lies ahead as we start Journey 328 through Rainbow Country. And our first stop is what I like to call the Rainbow Country School for Canadian Gay History. And today's lesson from activist, author, and historian Tim McCaskill, Canada's Gay Pride History.
"1969 was a big year. It was the year that saw both the Stonewall riots in New York and, more or less, decriminalization of gay sex in Canada. The following year, the Americans celebrated the anniversary of Stonewall with Christopher Street Liberation Day. That was the summer of 1970. They didn't actually call it Pride at the time. August 1st, 71 was Toronto's first official gay picnic at Hanlon's Point. It was organized by the Community Homophile Association of Toronto and Toronto Gay Action. 300 people showed up. Now, that wasn't officially a pride, but Gerald Moldenhauer, one of the veterans of those days, maintains that a march down Yonge Street a few weeks later should be called the first Toronto Pride. That was a warm-up for the more famous We Demand demonstration in Ottawa held August 28th that year. a protest against the inadequacies of Trudeau's decriminalization. By the way, if you want to see some pictures of those early days, check out Gerald's website. It's geraldmoldenhauer.com, and it's spelled JERALDMOLDENHAUER. The first official Toronto Pride was actually the next year, 1972, again in August. Then there was a second Gay Pride Week, August 17th to 26th, 1973. That one was national, not just Toronto. There were events and marches in Vancouver, Saskatoon, Ottawa, Montreal, and Halifax. The focus was political, on ending discrimination against queers, something that was still quite legal across the country at the time. Then, the following year, 1974, there was Pride number 3 in Toronto, August 17th. I came out of that one, so I remember it very, very well. We marched over to Queen's Park to again demand human rights protection. And then they stopped. There was nothing in 75. People were focused on a national lesbian and gay conference in Ottawa. And again in 76, all of us in Toronto were busily preparing to host the 4th National Lesbian and Gay Conference, which happened in September. Gay Days was a big festival in 78, but nothing called itself Pride again until 1981 after the Bath Raids. That's where the misconception that Pride began after the Bath Raids comes from. 81, I suppose, is significant because that's when the shift happened from August to the last weekend in June to harmonize with prides across the US. But that's not the first Pride. So when you hear someone say that the first Toronto Pride was in 1981, you should politely point out that that's not quite true. Toronto and other cities in Canada had our own August Prides for almost a decade before that. And there are still those of us around who remember. This is Tim McCaskill, a gay liberation dinosaur from another planet and author of Queer Progress.
Hi, everybody. This is Gino Vanelli. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, Billy Flanigan, the happiest man on earth.
Billy Flanigan.
Billy Flanigan.
Billy Flanigan.
Billy Flanigan.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Billy Flanigan's Experience.
It was amazing. Billy's been working at Disney for a very long time. It was like an institution.
I was loving what I was doing. It became my life. I became somebody who would learn things fast so that I would always be the one that they would turn to.
Hats off to Billy Flanigan. You know, the pandemic shut him down, so he decided to do singing telegrams with a personalized song and dance, spreading love one smile at a time.
I just say, take me where I'm supposed to go today to make a difference in someone's life.
Everybody says when you work on Disney property, you're creating magic for the guests. For Billy, that doesn't stop on Disney property. That's just his way of life.
He's pedaled over 3,000 miles on his bike, delivering smiles.
He is doing something so very simple, and it's making so many people happy.
He's like a fairy godfather, someone magical who just always comes when they need to be there.
My job at Disney has just been the most incredible journey. So I wake up every day and I think I am. I have no reason not to be the happiest man on earth.
Billy Flanigan, hi, how are you?
I'm doing great, Mark. Thank you. How are you?
I am well. I am better now. I am better now that I am talking to you. Finally, Billy Flanigan. Billy Flanigan, it sounds like a name from Leave It to Beaver or something. Fantastic. I'm so happy to have you on, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond, especially to talk about Billy Flanigan, the happiest man on earth. This is a new documentary that's out now on streaming. It's all about you, you, and you. So talk to me, give me the elevator pitch about what this documentary that's on you is telling? What's the story that you're getting at in this documentary?
There are several different stories throughout the entire film. It all started with something I did during COVID, which was I was shut down from Disney. I'm a Disney cast member performing there, and I just needed to be out and about and seeing people and meeting people. So I took my show on the road, and I got on my bike and I biked around the country, 7,000 miles, ringing doorbells, backing up, socially distantly delivering singing telegrams to friends, family members in 16 different states. I visited over 500 people. That caught the attention of this producer who was going to do a documentary just on the Flanograms. That's what I call them. My last name is Flanigan. But after talking to me and finding out my longevity at Disney, I've been a performing cast member there for 40 years, a singer, dancer, actor there. And also my stories of my childhood about being bullied because of what I wanted to do. And then later on in life, after being married for 32 years and having 4 children and 3 grandchildren, decided I was going to be true to myself. And I sadly broke up my family, but I ended up coming out. And so the film takes you through all of those stories. Also, there are other stories within there just about the industry going down, being considered a non-essential industry, but yet people needed that so bad during the lockdown.
You are a performer. You're a singer. You're a dancer. You're an actor. You've been working with Disney for over 4 decades. First of all, well done on that. Your love for performing, where does your love for performing and entertaining, where do you think that stems from?
I really truly believe that my dad got me into that. He loved sports. I was one of 6 children. My brothers were jocks. My sisters were cheerleaders. And I never caught the jock bug or the sports bug. I always enjoyed music. I enjoyed the movie musicals that my dad used to watch. And I think that really kind of hooked me on there. I started doing some theater in school and got teased for it horribly because it was not popular back then. But it was something that I was passionate about, and I loved seeing smiles on people's faces. I love, making people laugh, making people cry, just having them engage in the entertainment process. There's nothing like it.
Like I just said, you've been with Disney for over 4 decades. You are the longest continually contracted performer in Walt Disney World history. Okay.
So what that means is every year we are hired for we get a 1-year contract. That's it. That's all you're guaranteed is 1 year.
And each year you have to re-audition, correct?
Well, in the beginning you had to re-audition. After Equity took over our contracts there, you didn't necessarily have to re-audition, but you did have to go in for a contract meeting. So you were reassessed. And I have been fortunate enough to have 41 now. I'm in my 41st year, 41 consecutive contracts.
Wow.
So I never missed a beat. Yeah.
So back in the beginning, why did you want to go to work for Disney?
It was totally by accident. I went into a Shakespeare class in college that I had, and no one was in it. I was the only one there. And he said, "I'm surprised you're not at the Disney audition." I didn't even know what it was. And he said, "Oh, it's at the Copley Plaza. Just go get some music and go. You'd be perfect for Disney." And I was a senior in college, so I didn't really have any plans after that. I was working in nightclubs around the New England area.
You had
my sisters.
You had your own group, didn't you? Performing.
Yeah, my sisters and I, and the woman that became my wife, we were called the Copy Kittens and Company, and we were actually a lip sync group. Lip sync was popular back then in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I kind of really wasn't concerned about what I was going to do. I knew I had time, but I went to the audition. I was one of the last 6 people kept, and then was offered the job a month later and decided to leave and come down for a year and then maybe pursue my career on Broadway or in film, television, whatever. And my 1 year turned into 41. My career at Disney has been so unique and so unlike any others in theme park history because I was what they call the park swing. So I learned every show and I worked all the time, but I loved it. And still do.
Okay, so in the beginning, you talked about what happened during COVID. So you're at Disney, COVID happens, and all of the performers, including yourself, you essentially get fired because COVID shuts down Disney. And you have all the time in the world. And I guess because you're an avid cyclist, maybe you're like cycling around, you decide to visit some friends. So, and that turns into what, 7,000 miles across America, visiting people, doing singing telegrams, which becomes Flanigrams. But here's the question. When you first were visiting friends in the early days of COVID, what gave you the idea to basically show up at a friend's place and do a singing telegram? What gave you that initial idea?
It was the first 2 weeks. I did everything I was supposed to. I would bike at night, and when I feel like no one was out and about, just to be safe. But I started biking, and I thought, I knew a girl that lived right off of the bike trail that I was biking every day. And I thought, I'm just going to go knock on her door and say hello. So I knocked on her door. I backed up and I sang a little song and did a little dance just to cheer her up. And she started crying. And she said, I hadn't seen anybody in 2 weeks. Who knows what's going on in the world? I'm so lonely. And it was so nice to have somebody come knock on the door. And she posted something on her Instagram page, and people responded to that saying, oh, how nice. I would love one of those. So I started following who was commenting, and I went to their house, and then they posted something, and then other people were just, oh, I can't wait till he comes to my house. So then I started making a plan, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go out. And I actually wrote a little song and actually choreographed it and just did different areas all around. And once I kind of did a whole lot here in Central Florida with all my friends that I'd worked with here, somebody had offered or asked if I knew anyone that could drive her husband's car from Orlando to California. And then I went, gosh, if I put my bike on the back, I can stop in states along the way and Flanigan people who never thought they'd get one and who had been commenting, I'll never get one because I live in Texas or I live in Arizona or I live in California. So I did that. I told her not to tell anyone I was coming. And I, sure enough, went ahead and started doing that. When I came back to Orlando after that, I decided to go up the East Coast and do the same thing. And when I came back, still no back to work. So I went up the Midwest and did that whole area there. So all in total, 16 states, 500 people, 7,000 miles. So, and that all those miles were biking miles. I did ride my bike to different states, but I always made sure I parked at least 10 to 20 miles from somebody's house before I went, because part of my song and dance was I sang how many miles it took me to get to them. And I never want it to be, I biked 1 mile for one of your smiles, because that's not impressive.
So as we're doing this interview, are you back at Disney?
I am. Yeah. Disney, we were all on furlough. So Disney was awesome. They paid us for the first 5 weeks, paid our insurance through for a very long time. And then after 6 months, I was asked back, and they brought me back and taught me a show that I did not know, which was great. So I've been back since October of 2020. And I did continue my Flanigrams because there were still some people on lockdown. It got really hard once things started opening up because people weren't home all the time. I knew during the lockdown people would be home. So now I've kind of changed them. I still do them once in a while, but I know I'll listen to see if someone has COVID now, because then I know they'll be home, and then I'll go to their house and give them a little Flanigram now. But yeah, so I've been back since October 2020. And at first had survivor guilt a lot because so many of my friends and castmates were not back at work. They were bringing back shows that had very small casts that they could socially distant. So it was, very little entertainment in the beginning. And then as things started opening up more, Finding Nemo, the show that I was in before COVID, actually just came back to rehearsals in March, and we just opened in June. So it had been over 2 years.
So you have a lot of different names or monikers. Mr. Disney, a living legend, the happiest man on earth, husband, dad, grandpa. But there's one more word that's not necessarily a great word, but it's in your package. So I'm going to say it, but also known, and a lot of people in the LGBT community, faggot.
Mm-hmm.
You were married from what, 1983 to 2014?
1983 to 2014, yes.
You have 4 kids, 4 grown children, I believe, or mostly grown.
Yes. Yeah, all grown and gone. 2 of them are married, have children, and then my youngest son and my youngest daughter are not married, but are.
So growing up, were you attracted to men?
I knew I felt different. I didn't feel like my brothers did, or like my friends did, that, oh, look at that babe, isn't she hot? And for me, I grew up very religious. I was an altar boy. I grew up in the Catholic Church, and I knew that I was different. I didn't necessarily label it. I remember thinking my sister's boyfriends were handsome and thinking, gosh, maybe if I work out, I'll be handsome like that. And then I dated girls. I never went any farther than any, kissing and making out and stuff like that. But I knew that my religious background didn't necessarily allow that. So I wasn't questioning that very much. And then when I met the woman I married, Karen, things were different with her than they were with any other woman I'd ever met. And we connected, we got married, we had a great sex life. All of that was amazing, And I was working so much at Disney. We had kids. Everything got so busy that I really didn't think about it. Later on, after I had met other people who were homosexual and stuff like that, I thought, I probably have just been avoiding that forever, because I knew that I had different feelings from a very young age, but I fought them and I tried to pray them away. And I tried to, do everything that you possibly can not to admit or not to be something I didn't necessarily want to be gay.
Did you think that being married would cure you?
I did. I completely thought I was. And, for years and years, I really was. I would admire men, but I would never put myself in a situation where I would do anything with them. I was very faithful and devout, and just, I still was going to church. I was teaching CCD, Sunday school. I was singing in the church choir. So, my faith really, really prevented me from doing anything.
Religion had a hold on you.
It really did. It really did.
So,
and I was happy. I loved having a family. My wife was amazing. She still is. She went through a very difficult time once I ended up coming out. But, it was when I met this person who was married also. And, we were very good friends, and I thought he was handsome, and I knew that I had a crush on him. But I knew nothing would ever really happen because he was married and I was married. And then something tragic happened in his life, and he came up to me and he just said, I think there's a lot more in common that we have than we are admitting. And so we talked about our childhood, and they were so similar, and things that we felt were so similar, and things that we fought and things that we wanted, the family and all that. And it became obvious that the two of us liked each other more than just friends. And then my guilt and my feelings of, gosh, I can't live like this. I don't want to, be that husband who cheats on his wife and just sleeps with men and then goes home. Too much danger. There was too much. So we both decided we would tell our spouses and make a go of it. And so that's what we did. And it took a good, golly, until COVID. So it was 6 years of my ex-wife, or at the time now ex-wife, hating me. You know, she wouldn't go to therapy. She said, if I go to therapy, they're just going to try to convince me not to hate you, and I need to hate you. So it was a rough 6 years, but COVID really kind of brought us back together, because my daughter's a type 1 diabetic. She was living with me at the time, and my ex was the only one we'd let in the house. So she would come over and we'd have movies and, watch movies, have workout sessions. She'd hang out, we'd play games. She slept over some nights, and it was great for my daughter to see that. And it made us realize, it was time that we start doing family stuff again and being friends and all.
It sounds like a real life Grace and Frankie and Grace, whatever that show is.
Let me tell you, that came out after this all happened. And the first few episodes in the first season, I'm like,
that's us.
That's not
me.
how they're still talking to their spouse. That doesn't happen. They're not that happy, And I was just like, wait, I want to go call those people and say, no, this is how it works. This is how she hates me. She doesn't want to be with me. But,
so let me ask you this question. In 2022, a lot of people are seeing sexuality as more of a spectrum. So do you think you are gay or bisexual or somewhere along that line?
I think I'm gay. Yeah. For me, Karen was amazing. She was the first and only woman I ever had sex with. Mm-hmm. And I knew nothing else other than that. Mm-hmm. But once I went to the other side, let's say, once I started living the gay life, that just felt so right to me. This is where I belong.
Growing up, did you have any crushes on young men, on boys or anything like that when you were younger, when you were growing up?
Like I said, I would probably, okay, I'm going to say probably. I just never allowed myself to use that word. I would use it as admiration or fascination with people. I knew, like, my sister had Bobby Sherman posters up on them. I'm like, oh, Bobby, he's handsome. Things like, I remember things like that. So I'm guessing, yes, I probably did, but my brain wouldn't allow me to admit it.
When you came out, how did your kids react to you coming out?
I told each of them separately. They were shocked. But all of them said, Dad, you got to live your truth. And if that's your truth, we get it. Just don't abandon Mom. And I never did. I was always there for her, and for her to yell at, to hate and all that. But I've supported her ever since. And I understood the process she had to go through. And I honored that with them. I never abandoned her. I took what I felt like I deserved, and that was. But they were good. They very quickly started joking about certain things, and then saying, "Oh, gosh, we should have known. Oh no, we should have known."
This documentary, Billy Flanigan, The Happiest Man on Earth. Whose idea was this documentary?
Cullen Douglas, he is the director of the documentary. Mm-hmm. He had contacted his friend Randy Goodwin, who's the producer and owns 12th Angel Productions. It was Cullen's brainchild. He had contacted a friend of mine that he knew and said, "Do you know this guy? Has there ever been anything written about him or done?" And she contacted me, and I said no. And so Cullen got with me and his friend Randy and said, "Hey, there's this guy that's riding his bike and doing this thing," and said, "Start following him." And I just happened to be driving from Boston down to Florida. So I stopped in Atlanta area where Randy lives, and I went to his house and I flanagrammed him. They asked me to go and flanagram. So he didn't know who I was, what I was doing, And I talked to his family for a while, and then I left. And then Cullen said, he called and he said, well, you won him over. We are on board. We're going to do this documentary. And originally, like I said, it was just going to be on the Flanagrams. But after the first interview and them hearing so many Disney stories and so many life stories, they thought, I think we have a feature here. And I left it all in Cullen's hand. He told my story so much better than I ever could have. And the editing by Jeremy Glees was just incredible. At the preview the other night, people were laughing, they were crying, they were snickering, they were in just all the right places. They did such a great job. And I'm so proud that he was able to tell my story in such a perfect way.
Have you considered writing a memoir, a book at all about your full story?
Never about my full story. I have considered writing a book about my career at Disney. I have these weird little visions, everything that sometimes that pop in my head. I have a lot of time on my hands, especially when I'm biking, and a lot of time to think and stuff. And I thought, I would love to turn this into a musical, turn the movie into a musical, and I can just kind of picture it in my head on how
you have a stage.
Yeah. And I thought, gosh, that would be such a great thing. I have so many stories and so many years at Disney. I started writing a book called 20 Years Wearing Ears. And now I'm at 40 years, so I have a lot more chapters to write. But I dabbled in that a little bit. I'm not necessarily a writer. I would love to sit and tell people stories and let them write them, like Cullen. I'll tell you the story, you write it, you do it. But I would love for it to be a musical one day, because I think it could be one of those ones that would just be interesting enough for people to laugh and cry and have original music written about all these crazy things. And you wouldn't necessarily have to mention Disney, but theme park or whatever, you know how they do all that.
What was the hardest part about talking about yourself and what you've been through? What did you find most challenging to talk about?
Probably the coming out part, because I just did it.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone around me knew, and they would come up and they'd hug me, and I cried a lot. But I never really talked about it to anybody. So Cullen really was the first person that I had ever had conversations, other than the person that I was with at the time. And, we of course talked to each other about it, but we had such similar stories, so it was easier. But I'd never really talked to any friends. It just was what it was to them. And are you happy? And I always would say, it's so hard to be happy knowing that you've hurt so many people, not only your own family, but, his family as well. So that was very hard for me to chat about that. I've never chatted about it with my siblings. I mentioned it to them, and I told them, this is what's happening, and they met my person and tolerated, but we've never really had a deep discussion. None of them have ever come up to me and said, tell me your story, what's going on. So my mom had dementia, and so she never knew. My dad had passed before it all had happened. They always say your parents probably knew, but lived your lie with you.
The best part about telling your story?
Helping other people.
Mm.
I hope that if anybody is struggling with being bullied, if anyone is struggling about their sexuality, I hope that my story can help them in a way know that there is another side. Sorry. There is another side to that rainbow.
You're making me cry.
I'm so sorry. I kind of get really emotional because I don't talk about it a whole lot. Even the other night, I'm watching the film. My legs didn't stop shaking the entire time. My daughter was next to me sobbing. My ex was holding my other two sons' hands during this part because I know it was hard for her to hear a lot of this as well because she'd never heard it. But I know there's so many like me who are out there struggling that wanted just what I wanted. You know, you want to be normal or, you know, per se, what you consider, what you've grown up. I grew up in the 60s and the 70s. There was one lesbian that lived in town, and just hearing, you know, the negativity toward that, you thought, golly, I don't want that. I can't be that. And so you don't. I grew up in a very small town who just was, I mean, they would make fun of me and say it anyway. Oh, you're gay, you're a faggot. Flanafag was my nickname in school with, you know, the bullies. Oh, there you are, Flanafag. Fag again, and, you know, just all of that stuff. It was awful. And I am sure that if it wasn't for my French teacher in high school, that I would have been a statistic. I'm sure I would have taken my own life because it just was so horrible. And if there were social media back then, oh, forget it. But one of the things I do say in the film that all that bullying did for me, it was, it made me a kinder soul, because I'm reacting the same way I did in the movie. I don't ever want anybody to go through what I went through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if I could just help one kid or one married man saying, you know, I feel the same way you do. What should I do?
You're not alone.
You're not alone. But I think I would have, if I was smarter, I may have delayed my coming out until my daughter had graduated high school, because I know that those last 4 years for her were so hard.
Yeah.
Having us be separated and having her have to listen to her mom go in the bedroom and just sob for hours and hours and hours.
Billy Flanigan, I have to say, it's a powerful movie. It's a powerful story. I have less than a minute.
Okay.
I just have to say thank you so much for your time to tell your powerful story. It's a great movie. Well done. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Mark, so much. I appreciate the time.
Billy Flanigan.
Billy Flanigan.
Billy Flanigan.
Billy Flanigan.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to Billy Flanigan's Experience.
It was amazing.
Billy's been working at Disney for a very long time. He was like an institution.
I was loving what I was doing. It became my life. I became somebody who would learn things fast so that I would always be the one that they would turn to.
Hats off to Billy Flanigan. You know, the pandemic shut him down, so he decided to do singing telegrams with a personalized song and dance, spreading love one smile at a time.
I just say, take me where I'm supposed to go today to make a difference in someone's life.
Everybody says when you work on Disney property, you're creating magic for the guests. For Billy, that doesn't stop on Disney property. That's just his way of life.
He's pedaled over 3,000 miles on his bike, delivering smiles.
He is doing something so very simple, and it's making so many people happy.
He's like a fairy godfather, someone magical who just always comes when they need to be there.
My job at Disney has just been the most incredible journey. So I wake up every day and I think I am. I have no reason not to be the happiest man on earth.
Billy Flanigan, The Happiest Man on Earth, is available on Amazon.com, Apple TV, and Vudu. For even more information, check out gooddeedentertainment.com.
Hi, everyone. This is Mark Tewksbury, Olympic champion, leader, humanitarian. You're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
So, Rainbow Country airs on independent radio outlets, streaming services, as well as on the NCRA network, the National Campus and Community Radio Association. What do all of these outlets have in common? Well, they are all listener supported to help keep the lights on and the airwaves broadcasting coast to coast to coast. Here are the outlets that carry Rainbow Country. CJUC-FM, The Juice, in Whitehorse, Yukon. CJLY-FM in Nelson, BC. CFUR-FM in Prince George, BC. CFCR-FM in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. CKUW-FM in Winnipeg, Manitoba. CIUT-FM in Toronto, Ontario, the home of Rainbow Country. CKCU-FM in Ottawa, Ontario. Canoe-FM in Halliburton, Ontario's cottage country. CFRC-FM in Kingston, Ontario. CFRU-FM in Guelph, Ontario. CHMR-FM in St. John's, Newfoundland, and Bombshell Radio, a 24/7 streaming outlet. So if you are able to, please consider making a donation to this very outlet you are tuned to. If you're listening to the edited podcast version, please consider making a contribution to an outlet that does carry Rainbow Country. And by the way, the full list of outlets that carry Rainbow Country can be found at marktara.com. Just hit the syndication banner. After all, where else but on Rainbow Country will you find episodes featuring topics like the state of trans healthcare in Canada, being gay and being black, out LGBT athletes, and not to mention playing music from queer artists from around the world. Rainbow Country, a little gay radio show working to give voice to the LGBT community and beyond. And by the way, if you do make a donation, if you do make a contribution, please let me know. Hit me up on my socials at Mark Tara, or send me a personal email, mark@marktara.com. That way I can give you the recognition you deserve for letting your support be known nationally.
Hi, my name is Joanne Vanicola, and I'm an actor and a writer, and I was first on Rainbow Country with Mark Tara on discussing the massacre at Pulse Club in Orlando. I realized how important it was for our community to have a radio station, specifically for our issues, to talk about people in the LGBTQ community and to provide an outlet for our stories, to discuss our politics, culture, and give voice to the issues that matter to us, and of course our artists and the things that we do globally, and talk about culture. And without people like Mark Tara providing a space for this with a radio show like this, then we wouldn't have that voice. So support, tune in. Thank you.
I'm Brian Bradley, author of Outrageous Misfits, female impersonator Craig Russell and his wife, Lori Russellidi. You are listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.
Up next, a flashback to my interview with award-winning filmmaker Chase Joint, who talks about the new trans film, Framing Agnes.
I first encountered Agnes in graduate school. I read a case study about a young trans girl in the 1950s who lied her way into the UCLA gender clinic to get access to surgery. And I remember reading it and thinking, this whole thing is a lie. You know, I remember thinking, this passage is a lie. It's not telling the real story.
Well, the flip for me to the talk show is in part a nod to the fact that I think from many people of our generation, the talk show was the place where many of us first encountered gender nonconforming subjects.
You might be wondering where people go when they are experiencing problems of a sexual nature.
An experimental research team at UCLA is interviewing dozens of people about emerging problems of sex and gender.
It's wild to be a part of a project like this that kind of blows open a vault.
Your parents must be a little overwhelmed by your desire for all these changes.
Yeah, well, you know, they're old people. I have a friend, she's like me, and she helped me take a position as a receptionist at a hair salon.
Does the owner know about you?
They know I can type.
I put a bit of paint over the F on my driver's license, but the police scraped it off. They asked me, are you a man or a woman? And I said, well, that's a matter of opinion.
We have heard the story told by the hunter and not by the lion, and not by the lions who not only fought back but got away.
I have a tricky relationship to the truth for myself.
We've all been misled so many times.
How do you justify the lies?
How do you justify your questions?
Chase Joint, hi, how are you?
I'm great, so happy to be here.
I have to say thank you so much for your time, for being here, to have your voice, your story be heard by the LGBT community and beyond, especially to talk about Framing Agnes. This is your current film, your current documentary. Talk to me about the story that you're telling within Framing Agnes.
So Framing Agnes takes up these never-before-seen case files from a moment in the late 1950s at the UCLA Gender Clinic where a sociologist named Harold Garfinkel was interviewing various trans and gender nonconforming and non-binary people. And the project asks contemporary trans luminaries and performers to walk toward these historical subjects to unpack a whole host of questions, from what it means to be represented to the relationship between media and medicine and the ways in which these institutions make meaning about trans and gender nonconforming lives, and argues for a kind of unknowability or an opacity or a privacy as a mode of political power in this particular moment.
So based on transcripts from the 1950s, from a UCLA study, in a nutshell, do you know what was going on within the study?
Yeah, so, Harold Garfinkel in particular was a young sociologist, and he was in some ways looking to develop a more expanded theory of passing. And so he attaches to a person named Agnes of our title because she becomes for him an exceptional case study in gender passing. We can think about racial passing, vocational passing, all the other ways in which that word gets mobilized. But Garfinkel was a part of an interdisciplinary team of other researchers, psychologists, sociologists, who are all collaborating around a set of shared questions about what we might, recognize as problems of sex and gender.
You went to UCLA.
I did indeed.
Is this where and how you heard about this? Or did you know about all of this and Agnes beforehand?
Well, it's a little bit of a long story, but I will do my best to summarize it quickly, which is to say, while I was an undergraduate at UCLA, I became friends with a person named Kristen Schilt, who at that time was a graduate student in the Department of Sociology, where Harold Garfinkel was still emeritus before he passed in 2011. And Kristen and I have now had a 20-year-long friendship, and through a fellowship that we received at the University of Chicago, began to think together about the legacy of the case study of Agnes in sociology. And because we're geeks and we like hanging out and troubling over the same questions, we managed to find our way into the private archival holdings of Garfinkel after his death. And it's there where we unearthed the transcripts, which then unlocked the potentials of the project.
There are audio tapes, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And in Framing Agnes, in the documentary, there's one moment where there is a bit of, I guess it's Agnes talking.
It is indeed. Yes.
Talk to me about how you found these audio tapes and what went through your mind when you did find them.
So one of the extraordinary things about Harold Garfinkel is that he was an obsessive archivist. And so he recorded every conversation that he had. He kept every draft of every paper that he had ever authored. And when Kristen and I approached the archive, to be perfectly frank, it wasn't an archive. It was a storage facility full of his belongings. And so as part of the work, as part of our contribution to the work, we began to organize and categorize boxes and piles and ephemera. And throughout the boxes, we would pull papers into one pile and tapes of a variety of different styles and formats into another pile. And at the time of our investigations, none of it had been digitized, none of it had been restored. And we were actually just very lucky through a series of fortunate events to gain access to that scrap recording, which we know to be Agnes. But there is so much more that is not explored in his collection that I'm sure would reveal all other kinds of pathways for future project creation.
So, Framing Agnes features a number of trans subjects that were part of this study. An older trans man, trans women, a trans teenager. How did you decide who you would feature in Framing Agnes?
So our film includes the stories of 6 people, and we gained access to 8. And we didn't choose to include the latter 2 because there wasn't enough information to build any kind of attempt at a portrait. And it felt unethical to include the story of someone who perhaps passed through the office once looking for a very particular piece of information and then went on their way. We really wanted to spend time with those who had returned to Garfinkel's office and therefore allowed us to have a richer and more dynamic engagement with their opinions and their history.
So there's Agnes, and then there's Georgia, a Black trans woman played by Angelica Ross, who people might know from Pose. Georgia, I guess, was, or maybe Georgia may still be alive, I don't know, a Black trans woman in the 50s? What went through your mind when you found that story? About a Black trans person, a Black trans woman in the 50s.
I mean, one of the things that we know as a foundational set of commitments and knowledges is that trans people have always existed, and that it's through the violent, racist, exclusionary forces of institutions like medical establishments and like research institutions that racialized and otherwise minoritized characters disappear from the record, right? And so to find Georgia's transcripts, words, feelings in the archive was an extraordinary opportunity to think about the violence of this kind of approach to research and to archives more broadly, but also to invest in the extraordinary access and life-giving that we have when we are allowed to live alongside her words. And I think one of the things that Jules Gill-Peterson does so beautifully in the film is draws our attention to these attachments. Who do we need from history and why? And who I need might be different than who you need or approach, and how can we actually sort of wrestle and sit with that tension, recognizing that the archive is always incomplete and the archive is already a curated moment where all of those people, Georgia, Agnes, everyone else who arrives in our film is performing a very particular version of themselves for a very particular reason. And so part of the work of the film, yes, is to spend time with the archive, but to also be reckoning and asking these broader questions of what we expect access to actually afford us.
Sundance, you won 2 awards there. Framing Agnes did. And a big congrats on that. When audiences see Framing Agnes, is there a takeaway that you hope your audiences come away with?
It's such a big question, and it imagines an audience to be a consolidated thing. I think that we made the project recognizing that we wanted a smart, unapologetic, engaged trans audience to feel with us in the project. And if I like to think about the metaphor of the London transit system. This is a bit of a divergence, but here we go. Zone 1 is the downtown core, and Zone 2 and Zone 3 are these concentric circles that move out. And if, trans people are at our Zone 1 core, I'm just as interested in what's happening in Zone 6, but it feels like a kind of trickle effect. And so I hope that people feel implicated. I hope that there's a way in which the film argues clearly that, the time is up for trans people being treated as exceptions and cis people being treated as the kind of status quo standard, that we are all actually implicated by the machines of medicine and media, that we are all negotiating our genders and our races and our classes in ways that are complex and that are interrelated. And so the more we can recognize ourselves regardless of our identificatory positions within the fabric of the film, I think the more interesting our conversations and the more interesting our films will be.
Chase Joint, thanks for your time. Well said, well done, well made.
Thank you so much. Love our chats.
I first encountered Agnes in graduate school. I read a case study about a young trans girl in the 1950s who lied her way into the UCLA gender clinic to get access to surgery. And I remember reading it and thinking, this whole thing is a lie. I remember thinking, this passage is a lie. It's not telling the real story.
Well, the flip for me to the talk show is in part a nod to the fact that I think from many people of our generation, the talk show was the place where many of us first encountered gender nonconforming subjects.
You might be wondering where people go when they are experiencing problems of a sexual nature. An experimental research team at UCLA is interviewing dozens of people about emerging problems of sex and gender.
In December, Framing Agnes is playing in select theaters across Canada. For more information, simply check out framingagnes.com.
The phone rings. I got a message from the mayor. He's going to call me back the next day. I get the call, and he said, if you'd accept, we'd like to honor you with the key to the city. There was an event later that year in May. Just a key, right? Like, key to what? A decent job, a good singing career. It's really a metaphor, but it's history. So a reporter wants to talk to me and says, so it's a key, right? Like, what's the big deal? I said, well, not everybody gets the key. So I looked it up, and I guess it is kind of a big deal.
The date, May 17th, 2018, when trans activist Susan Gapka made history by becoming the first trans woman to be presented with the key to the city of Toronto. By the way, past recipients include Rush and the Raptors.
Bill 7, to ban discrimination in employment, government services, and housing, based on a person's sexual orientation, was up for a vote at Queen's Park. Most NDP and Liberal MPPs supported the bill, but without some progressive Conservative legislators backing, a divisive split could rack the province. 4 PCs decided to break party ranks to vote with their conscience and support Bill 7. Cabinet Minister and MPP Dennis Timbrell did it to show solidarity for his beloved brother, the well-known drag queen Rusty Ryan. And for me, a gay politician who was not yet out, I had to take a stand. We were known as the Gang of Four. I'm former Cabinet Minister and MPP Phil Gillies. The date, December 2nd, 1986, when LGBT rights came to Ontario.
And just like that, this little gay journey through Rainbow Country has come to an end. For the full 2-hour episode, simply head over to marktara.com, where everything is connected, and hit the archives banner. To keep up to date with the show, check out my socials at Mark Tara. The podcast is available on all major platforms, including audible.com and iHeartRadio. Finally, I want to take this time to thank you for taking your time to be with me. Remember, we are living in days of making dreams come true. So believe in yourself, and the world will believe in you.
Hi, this is Police Constable Danielle Botno, also known as LGBT Cop, and you're listening to Rainbow Country with Mark Tara.